Thank you. Hey, thank you for attending this event. What's wrong with your Horizon client? When I originally submitted this session, I said, you know, what the hell's the matter with your thin client? But they kind of changed the name just a little bit here. So we'll go ahead and get going with it. My name's Tom Fenton. I have a couple different hats. I write for Storage Review. I think I'm one of the few people in the industry that actually looks at thin clients, Horizon clients, and does hands-on reviews of them, and have probably a dozen, 2 dozen of them on Storage Review, where I take a look at them and, you know, see their purpose and see what their best use case is. I go from everything from Pi-based thin clients that are $50 to, you know, these expensive ones put out by Dell and HP that, you know, can cost $1,000. I also write for virtualization and cloud review, do a little bit more work with them, different work with them. Just got done doing a big write-up on VMware Workstation with them. But my main job is working with ControlUp, and what ControlUp does is it monitors endpoints, it monitors virtual desktops. And I got called into a really interesting call, and I found some kind of interesting statistics there. We got called into a hospital, a healthcare provider in the UK, and they had 10,000 devices, and their users were not happy with their virtual desktops. They said, you know, these aren't reliable, blah, blah, blah. They're using Horizon. And so we said, okay, we monitor the whole stack, so let's get in there, let's take a look and see what's going on with it. And the first thing that we found was that they didn't really have problems with their Horizon desktops. They were actually running really, really good. It was the endpoint devices that they were connecting to that was causing the problem. We sat there, we gathered data for about a month. They were interesting because they ran some local applications, and then they used the Horizon native client on Windows to access streaming applications and virtual desktops when they needed to. So the first thing we did is we kind of took a look at their hardware, got a good hardware inventory of them. We saw that they were mostly a HP machine. They had this Dynabook. Has anyone heard of Dynabook? I think it might be kind of a European company. You've heard of it? And yeah, and yeah, and I never heard of them before. And are they still in business? Maybe, maybe not. Okay. And so we went in there, and then we looked at the model of devices. This is an eye chart. Don't worry about it. It just shows you the wide variety of devices they have, and this will come into play in just a second. The first thing we wanted to look at is these devices were having blue screens of death, right? They're Windows devices, they're going to have blue screens of death. And this is a day in the blue screen of death. These are the devices, the top 20 devices, and you know how many, I'm sorry, this is a week, you know, how many times they had the blue screen of death. Sure, they have 9,000 devices, but seemed a little bit suspicious, right? That something was going on there. So we took a look at these, took a look, and we kind of started to notice some trends that certain models seem to be having more issues than other models. So we created a graph. The blue line there is the percentage of devices, and the orange line is the percentage of crashes that those devices are having. So we grouped them up. We can see that they have one device that really performed well. They were, you know, about 25% of the devices, but they were only having 13% of the crashes. So they were, you know, they were doing good. But those weren't the ones we were really worried about, right? The ones we were worried about were the ones that are having crashes. And this is that Dyna one that I was talking about. They were only 16% of them in their environment, but they were responsible for 23% of the crashes. We also saw some of the older HP ProBooks, you know, 5% of the devices, 12% of the crashes. The same with the G7. So we were able to figure out, these devices, this is one of your pain points. And so they were able to go through, and with information like this, you can go to your manager. They were able to go to the manager and say, we just need to do a hardware refresh. I don't know about you guys, but trying to get new hardware in a hospital environment where they're very tightly constrained, you need good data to show them, say, this is why we need it. They're causing us problems. We just need to do it. Next thing we looked at was the application crashes. And we found that one application, it was a shell command, we saw over 20 million crashes a day from this one application. It'd come back up, but it'd crash. That's 50 per device per day. And they didn't have this insight. They didn't have any tools to monitor it, to collect it. And then we had another one, the service host, that was running some kind of WBIOS service. That was also just 6,000 crashes a day. That's 2/3 of their devices was having that. And McAfee, DLP crashes, everyone's favorite, right? McAfee. It was crashing too. They didn't have that insight. They didn't know where to go and investigate it. We found that some of these were coming from specific devices, and these bottom 9 were responsible for like 82% of the crashes. So these devices were actually causing it. Once we got rid of those, their calls went way down. It was truly remarkable that just this small subset of devices was causing them so much pain. They just didn't have the metrics. They just couldn't measure it. And then we took those devices, did a little bit more analysis, and saw that this Tecra, just a horrible device. 56% of the crashes were coming from 16% of the devices. Again, they were able to go up to upper management and say, these are problematic devices, we need new devices. And so they were able to budget that and get it in. Here's a few more problem devices that we saw. These didn't have as big a footprint in it, but still, whenever the orange line is a lot longer than the blue line, they gave us something to look at. And on the other hand, they had some very stable devices. The HP EliteBook 830, fantastic, great device, and the 820, great device. And that's what they were able to say to the manager, let's get some more of these in. They aren't problematic, they're good devices. Some other insights that we came up with. We came up with this synthetic score, metric score, that measure different network connectivity, things like that. And 1/3 of their devices kind of were lower than the metric that they wanted to meet. The bench score was 7 out of 10. 1/3 of their devices weren't there. They figured they needed at least 2 gig of free memory, and a lot of their devices didn't have that. We even went in saw things like low battery health. When the battery was going to die, the health indicator was only 50%. So we were able to present them with that, and they were able to go ahead and order those batteries before it failed on the people, because they knew they would have to be replaced sooner or later. Another interesting thing we were able to do is get the Wi-Fi signal strength, and 1,200 devices. People were too far away from their Wi-Fi router. So easy fix, right? Oh yeah, you're having problems with your Horizon desktop. Get closer to your router. And we can see that in real time. And they actually set up an alert that will pop up a little thing on the endpoint device to say, your Wi-Fi signal, because people just don't look at that little icon, right, on the taskbar. So we now have a pop-up that pops up and says, move closer to it. So recommendations. The first thing they needed to do is get some kind of an automated ticket system to track these devices. They didn't know they were having all these problems until we went in there and analyzed them and got them. They definitely needed to upgrade some old devices. Just this small block of devices was causing big headaches for them. They went in and they looked at those applications, those bad applications, those 3 that were causing all the problems. Took a look at them, they were able to fix them. Again, a lot of calls went away. The poor Wi-Fi signal, they developed a pop-up to show when that was happening. And the other thing that we noticed was their logon times ranged from 71 seconds to 3 minutes and 20 seconds. And when you're in healthcare, that just doesn't fly. So we made a list of those. We went through. We actually, one of my coworkers, Trenton Ty, who's Mr. Analyze Logon Duration, I don't know if you've ever seen his script, works with Guy Leach on it. He was able to go in there and say, you know, this is why your GPO, your app volumes, and go through and help them out with that. So they're working on bringing that down. They're not down to where they want to be, 30 seconds, but they kind of know that they have a problem now, at least. So my big 5 takeaways was, hey, we have a problem with our Horizon desktops. No, you don't. It's your endpoints, it's your networking, it's your infrastructure. We looked at their desktops were running just fine. Then we needed to go through and kind of aggregate the data and get a high-level picture, see what's doing it. And don't be fooled by the average, because looking at the numbers, average things are horrible just because these, 9, 10 devices were given all sorts of balloon screens of death and application failures. And you need a tool to collect that information, aggregate it, and analyze it. And that's it, guys. Thank you for showing up. I hope you got something out of this, and be over there taking questions if you have any. Thank you.
VMware ransomware recovery. So you hear this a lot, and today we'll see why. My name is Vladimir Velikov, and I'm a staff engineer at the VCDR team at VMware, and I'm also a VMware Code community coach. So yeah, usual disclaimer that anything I say is not binding to VMware in any way. So let's have a look at the VMware ransomware recovery, how it's built, and basically how it works. So on the left-hand side, you have the production site. Let's say it's on-prem, although we support cloud, with your workloads. So these get replicated onto the VCDR service in the cloud. So you get a bunch of snapshots there. And the first step you need to take for your ransomware protection is to configure a suitable retention period. So because of the way VCDR is built with the scale-out cloud file system, these snapshots can be collected for a really long retention period. So you can select 3 to 6 months, for example, and this is really needed in the ransomware scenario because modern ransomware is not showing up right away very frequently. You would have it lurking in your system, like moving laterally, trying to get through your network to get to other parts of your system, and only then encryption would kick in. So you really need old snapshots in certain scenarios. So let's say we select 3 to 6 months of retention. And then you wake up so yeah, some of these are infected, some of the workloads, and also some of the snapshots. One morning you wake up and you have big parts of your data are encrypted. So second step, you need to pick a snapshot to recover from. And normally you would do this by hand, but we have a built-in anomaly detection mechanism. So these are like 2 charts which are showing change rate and entropy rate. So based on that, you can figure out that, hey, the data between this and this snapshot changed significantly. So maybe I should take an earlier snapshot. You will see that a bit later. So you make an informed decision about the recovery point, and isolated recovery environment is provisioned for you in the cloud. Last thing you want to do is when this disaster strikes, you start figuring out what recovery site I need to build, how do I isolate it so that there is no reinfection. So this is done for you. And also because of the way the scale-out file system works, VMs are stored, there is no restore, so VMs are stored in ready to mount mode, so we call this live mounting. So they are live mounted onto the IRE in quarantined mode. So it means that no network is allowed, they cannot talk between each other, they cannot talk to the IRE, they cannot talk outside. So at this stage, there are some carbon black vulnerability scanning, also certain file system checks. This is pretty standard stuff, but modern ransomware is very frequently fileless. So you won't catch too much this way. And that's why VMware ransomware recovery has the behavioral analysis from carbon black. And what does it mean? It means that you can actually power on these VMs. You don't worry that they will infect anything because this is isolated environment. You run these scanners and they can raise alerts. They can tell you if there is something going on, if there are like the VM is trying to do some external calls, things like that. And you can also play with the isolation levels of the network, so you can gradually add like allow inbound connections, outbound connections, and so on. And you can also manually inspect if there is anything suspicious with this. So if you discover suspicious activity and you are not fine with this snapshot, then you just go back to step 2 and do it all over again. So this is pretty standard flow. You have to do this iteration anyway when you do ransomware recovery or disaster recovery. But the big thing about the VMware ransomware recovery is that this iteration is very quick. So you have the anomaly detection, giving you the ability to quickly select the right snapshot or one which is likely to be good. Very quick mounting of the VMs, IRE done for you, so that you don't have to figure out exactly in the most precious moments how to do this. The security scanning and with the alerts, and then this way you can find your good snapshot. But not only that, we also support the file restore. So let's say you discovered a good snapshot, but you are still losing some data. So in order to minimize this, you can actually use a different snapshot, pull the files from there, which are kind of new and things you want to store, and create a curated, build a curated image. And once you're fine with this image, you can actually restore the VMs to the protected site and have everything up and running in a healthy state. And at this point, the IRE is decommissioned, so you practically pay only for the time of your recovery. Of course, there's also testing mode, so you can regularly run this flow to see how that you can still perform it correctly. So we don't have too much time for demos. You can reach out to me after the session if you want to see the demo, but here are a few screenshots. So this is the anomaly detection. So there is obviously something going on here, so that's why we take an earlier snapshot. You can label the snapshots. Let's say, oh, I found that this is fine. I mark it as verified, but let's try to find maybe a newer one if to get as much data as possible. And once I have a selected snapshot, I can pull from the bad ones. I can pull individual files. And this is how getting individual files works. So yeah, you just use a different snapshot. You're presented with the files, and you add these to the curated image. And this is a screenshot of all the network isolation levels. So you can play with them. You can go fully isolated. You can try opening up and see if something strange is going on. And when you are fine with this, you can go ahead and open it completely. Now, what's new? Like the fundamentals are these: guided workflow, anomaly detection, and behavioral analysis. But on top of that, in the last 2 months, we have some really cool features which are important. So the concurrent multi-VM recovery means that you can have a whole team working together, having the same overview of the recovery status of each VM. So you don't have to go one by one and have only one person doing this and keeping track of things, but you can have a whole team doing this and really get it quickly up and running. The other one, run VMs in the cloud, so your business doesn't have to stop. Now you can actually run these VMs in production in the cloud while you're doing the recovery and all the analysis and checks. Yeah, your business doesn't have to suffer in the meantime. And the last two things are what was announced today. Intelligent threat detection. This is AI-based module, which is part of the ransomware recovery solution. This analyzes your snapshots, even offline, and checks if there is a ransomware, even before encryption. So it can tell you, hey, you you might be encrypted soon, so you can actually take precaution and scan and remove it quickly. And it would also help you after encryption to clean it up quicker. And last but not least, VMware Live Recovery. Yeah, you know, at VMware, we've been having a lot of DR products. So this is like a first step in converging those DR products in different aspects. So we are starting with billing and like a unified management UI through which you can view your on-prem pairs, you can view your VCDR deployments and things like that. So these things are preview, so we hope to get them in soon. Now, VMware Live Recovery is actually an intersection of many different products within VMware, which are not particularly new, but in combination, the combination is really powerful. So you get VMC on AWS with the IRE, the firewall rules from NSXT, security scanning and behavioral analysis from Carbon Black, and putting it all together through the VCDR. So this is like a combination of all these innovations into one. But this doesn't mean that you have to buy each one separately. You get ransomware recovery, and all the other pieces come in for you. And that's about it. So if you want to see a demo of the ransomware recovery, just reach out to me after that, or if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
So, welcome to this presentation where I'll show how we have evolved from running our scheduled tasks in a Windows server and up to a modernized Kubernetes platform. My name is Rudi Martinsen, and I'm working at a company called Intility, and we're a Norwegian-based service provider. We run a shared infrastructure platform for all of our customers. Over 500 customers. We run approximately 400 ESXi hosts and 9,000 virtual machines. So for us, automation is key. Without it, we can't scale. And this is the story of how we are evolving our internal operations. So I am, as I expect many of you guys are, I'm coming from an infrastructure background. So this is kind of my disclaimer. It won't necessarily be all of the best practices we follow, but this is our story and how we have done it, and this is how it works for us. And we are also learning as we go. So this is kind of an ongoing evolvement of our process. And this presentation won't be very deep on all the terminology and all of the buzzwords and so forth. But I wanted to say that whereas DevOps to me is more of a cultural thing, this GitOps thing is more focused on the tools and the methodology you use. And that's what we are bringing from it. A couple of things we'll touch upon. CI and CD. Those are some buzzwords you probably have heard. So we're going to see a couple of examples of it. And hopefully it makes sense then. Because I imagine as an VI admin, you might think, why should I care about this CI/CD thing? What value can it bring me? So to show that value and how we look at it, I've created this small demo, which we're going to follow along during the presentation. And this may or may not be a standard task that you perform in your infrastructure, but we, at least, we like to keep our folder structure pretty tidy. So we're obviously putting VMs into different folders based on in this case, the customer name. But we think manual work is boring, obviously, and it doesn't scale. So with 9,000 VMs, we can't manually move them around. So the answer to that would be to create this script, which, based on the naming standard we have, can move those VMs to where it should be. And this works, but that's still manual, because you have to run that script manually. So the answer to that problem would be the Windows Task Scheduler. So you'll set up a Windows server, you copy over your script, you put up a scheduled task, and you hope it will run when you think it should run. So if you have worked with the Windows Task Scheduler for some time, you know that it comes with a few quirks. And you're also very dependent on that server to be up and running at all times. Another problem that might arise is that if you are like us, we are a team of administrators, which we may work on the same script, or we have different scripts. So from time to time, we'll get into some merge conflicts. We're not exactly sure which version of this script is the correct one. So then you introduce a Git repository. And if there's something I wanted to take with you from this presentation, that is, please use Git for your source code. But now we have a solution where multiple admins can write scripts, work on the same script, push it to a Git repository, and you got versioning control, and you can handle the merge conflicts. But you're still very dependent on that one server. So this is the story of how we have evolved from that. internally we have a lot of in-house developers. So they create software that supports our shared platform. So both internally, but also for our customers. And as you might know, that with developers, they tend to bring along a few tools and platforms that you may or might not enjoy running, but still they have some tools. So we have just taken advantage of that existing platform that they have and the tools they are using. So based on a Kubernetes platform and with their developer tools. So we haven't set up anything specially for this. But the first thing to do when we were to move this to Kubernetes was obviously to containerize it. We needed a way to run that script inside of a container. And unfortunately, no live demo, but this is a recording. So first thing to do is then to make this run in a container is obviously we can't sit and type in the password. So in this case, we are pushing those through environmental variables. Might not be the best practice, but this is for the demo. This is how we do it. So in this case, we have based the container image from the official VMware Power CLI image. We copy over the script to the container, and we build a new container image out of it. This takes some seconds, but now we have a container image locally on our machine. So let's try to run that. So we push the environmental variables through both the command line here and also an environmental file, and we tell it to run that one script that we have copied over. So on my Mac, this takes actually a couple of minutes because it's an ARM-based processor and the image is for AMD, but we see that it can run, and it gives the same output as the script did before when we run it manually. So now we have created a container image of it. The next step would be to run this in our Kubernetes cluster. And to run a container in Kubernetes, you may or may not know, but then you have to run it inside of a pod. So we create a pod specification telling it to run a container based on that container image. But for Kubernetes to run that, for the nodes, Kubernetes nodes to run that, we need a way to have them pull that image. So we can't use our local machine, so first we have to push that image to an image repository. So next demo would be then first to take a look at this pod specification. We specify which image we want it to run. So we need to push our image up to this image repository. And we'll just tag the existing image with a new tag. So it's not actually two different images, it's just references to the same image. And we can push it to our image repository. So here we are running Harbor, which is an open source tool. So we have a project called PS where we are pushing all our PowerShell-based container images. And we can see we have our image available with that tag that we specified. Now, let's try to run this image inside of our Kubernetes cluster. So the cluster has one namespace called Argo Demo, which is empty by now. The only thing that lives in there is two secrets, which is specifying the credentials for authenticating to both the vCenter and the Harbor registry. There's also other ways of doing this, obviously, but again, this is how it works for us. So now the next step would be to try to run this pod inside of our Kubernetes cluster. So we are applying the specification. This is now happening locally on the Kubernetes cluster. So we can go and check if that pod got created. It does, and then it's now spinning up a container. And after a few seconds, that container should start to run, and then it will start to run our script. And we can also verify that this is the same script. We can go and check the logs of that pod, because we are outputting the same thing as we have done locally on our machine. So what we have done now is that we have created a container image. We have pushed it to the container image repository. And we have instructed Kubernetes to run that container on the cluster. So the next step would be to schedule that to run on specific intervals, as you would have done with a scheduled task. So the way to do that in a Kubernetes cluster is through something called cron jobs. And if you have worked with Linux servers, then you might recognize that with the cron tab thing. That job specification, you'll set a syntax with the cron tab and when it should run, and it will run that pod as you request it to do. So in essence, that would be to replace the Windows server with Kubernetes in this case. But instead of us manually creating that job and making sure that exists in the Kubernetes cluster, we are going to use a tool called Argo CD. There's also other alternatives. If you are running Tanzu, you can use the Flux CD, which is a part of the Tanzu package repository. But internally, we are using Argo CD. So what Argo does is that it will, by instructions, we can instruct it to go and look for a YAML specification inside of a Git repository. Then it will make sure that that resource gets created or deployed to the Kubernetes cluster. And then Argo is responsible for that resource and how that is dependent on the code that we have pushed to the Git repository. Still, it's the Kubernetes cluster that will run and be responsible for running the code, but Argo makes sure that the resource exists. So that's the next demo. We'll go and check the job specification first, and as you might notice, the only difference from before is that cron syntax at the top. So we now need to push this code into Git, because Argo will go and check a Git repository for it. So we have decided to put this in the same repository as the source code in a different folder. There's other ways of doing that as well, but this is how we do it. So we'll push that code to Git. And just verify that our code has been uploaded. So this is the same job specification. Now we'll instruct Argo to connect to this Git repository. So I'll paste in the repository URL, enter the username and password. Obviously not a best practice using root credentials, but I had some issues in the lab, so I had to revert to that. But now we see that we have successfully connected to the Git repository. We can now go and create an application, which is the name for it in Argo. So we'll give it a name. We'll put it in a project in Argo, which is just a logical construct. And then tell it where in that repository should you go and look for the YAML specification. And then that was the folder name there, the GitOps. And then where should this run? So Argo is running in the same Kubernetes cluster, so we can use the default service label. And we specify the namespace. So at this point, nothing has happened on the Kubernetes side because we haven't synchronized this yet, but we can go in and check what Argo will create. So the desired state of this application would be that job specification. So the moment we go and synchronize this, Argo will reach out to the Kubernetes cluster, and it will create that cron job. And we'll see we have one more resource, the cron job. So in a couple of minutes, which we don't have because of time constraints, so we're fast forwarding the video a bit, but now it's up to Kubernetes and its scheduler to run this cron job. Argo doesn't run it, as I said. It's Kubernetes that runs it, but Argo can make sure that it runs, and it will also report on what has happened. So it knows the state of the job and what is running in the cluster in this namespace. And we see our VMs have been moved as previously. So this is all working fine, but at one time you might need to do some changes to this script of yours. And if you remember back when we did, when we created the container, we had to build a new container and then push it to the image repository. That's also a manual thing that we don't like. So instead of us doing that manually, we'll take advantage of the built-in CI functionality in the Git repository, GitLab in this case, to have GitLab do that for us. So the way we do that, or first let's just take a look. We're still running on the 001, but now there's a problem in our code. Something has happened. So after a bit of troubleshooting, we see that someone has renamed that folder. So we decided to fix that by updating our script with a new name. So we go and fix that first. And obviously we'll test it and all of this, and then we'll push it up to the Git repository, so we always have the latest version available there. But again, instead of us now manually building a new container, let's have a look at how we can have GitLab do that for us. So we have created this specification, which will run what's called a CI pipeline. And here we are using a little tool called Canico, which can work with Docker files and build Docker containers or container images, and then also push them to a registry. And there's also other alternatives here. But based on a tag, we're only running this pipeline based on a new tag. So we tag our repository and then push that tag to the GitLab. We'll see that this pipeline is firing. And there's one job, and that's building the new image and pushing it to the image repository. In this pipeline, we could have included testing and much more, but just for brevity, we have just included the build of that image. And it uses the same Docker file as we saw previously. So we now have a new image available to us just because we pushed something to Git. So the next step now would be to update the job specification in Argo to use this new image. But again, instead of us going into Argo, synchronizing, and so forth, we'll enable auto-synchronization in Argo so that it's based on a schedule. I think it's 15 minutes by default. It will automatically go and check if there is some changes to this GitOps code. So let's check that first. We will go in and verify that we are still running the GitOps, or the cron job on the old image. We'll go and enable the autosync in Argo. And then we'll go and update our GitOps code. This is also something that could have been done in the CI pipeline. So just to update what image we are supposed to run. But we have chosen to do this as a manual step for now, because we want to have full control over when do we put this new image into production. So we're now pushing this code to the GitOps, to the Git repository. So we will just go and verify that the new image tag is available or is used, which it is. And now it's just a matter of waiting. So I think, as I said, 15 minutes as the default. We will notice that it fires off a new job. It will error out again because it still uses the old version of that image. But now it has found that there's some changes in the GitOps code. So let's go and fetch those. So the image tag has been updated. Still, I think it fails one more time because that job got started before the synchronizing was finished. But the next time now, the correct image should be used. And our script is running as it should again. And the VMs have been moved from the staged folder to the customer folders. So you might still think that this is a lot of moving parts. Why should I do this? What's the point? So just to reiterate, what we are doing now as a system admin, we are creating our scripts as we would have, and like we have done for many years. We push them to the Git repository, and we can tag that Git repository. Then automatically GitLab will create a new container image. It will push that to the image repository. And we have set up Argo so that it, on a schedule, will go and check that GitOps code. So we are only doing changes in our source code in the Git repository, both for the script and the container image itself, but also for the GitOps code. And the automation will automatically update our Kubernetes resources for us. So the only thing we need to care about is updating our code and push it to Git. So with that, I think we should take the questions later on. I'll stick around for a minute. I have a blog post that details this a bit, which you can check out. There's also other ways of reaching me if you have questions later on. So please check out those resources. And also the code for all of this is up at my GitHub repo. So with that, thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you guys for joining me in this session. This is my actually 4th session of this week. If my voice started to disappear, please bear with me a bit. My name is Adam Mazuz, a senior cloud solution engineer, working here for PureSearch for the past 3 years, and also I'm a V expert for this year. In this session, I'm accompanied with 2 of my friends, Tony and Mark, and I'm sure that you're going to be having all of those characters as well in your life. So let me tell you a story, right? So I'm gonna call this story a day in the life of a DBA and infra admin. Think about Tony, the DBA. He wants to have some backups to his databases, right? He has a VM, he has a SQL database, he wants to back up. He goes to Mark, the infra admin, says like, hey, can you take a backup of this VM? And hey, consider it done. But when Tony started like to look at this, how he can take a backup of that SQL database, he started like to realize that there's a lot of things he needs to go through. The vSphere client, the storage UI. He needs sometimes to automate stuff, so he needs to know about where to start, right? So he goes back to the DBA Mark and he said like, hey, please let me know which one what's your volume name? And Mark does not know about that because all of his vision is I know how to access the operating system. I know which drive letters, mount points, right? And at the end, Tony manages to take a backup for Mark. However, a few days later, the DBA comes back to the infra admin like, hey, can you please refresh that database? And then the conversation starts again. But at that point, the infra admin realized that there is a new backup SDK that the backup or the DBA admins can utilize. And he goes like, oh, do you know about the backup SDK for the vVols or for any physical server that you have your database? Like, yes, here he is. So in Pure Storage, we thought about these problems. There's a lot of people really are best of how this workflow works. If you need just to take their databases to be backed up, or like any application running on a Windows server. So we came up with this backup SDK that it can be installed through the base gallery. And for now, as a beta version, it's only Windows servers, and it can be called remotely any machine that has PowerShell installed in it, right? And the other thing we put in mind here is that it's no metadata involved. So there is no single point of failure when you're creating your backups. I'm going to talk about this in a few seconds. So why we've created this, right? As I mentioned, previously we have something, we have an extension for the SQL Server Management Studio, if you know about this, but it has a limited scope. It's only designed for Microsoft SQL on Windows. So we wanted to decouple those backups from a SQL server and enable any application on Windows. So as I mentioned, no metadata, so there is no single point of failure. And also, there is no hard coding into the extension. So there is no need to tie down the PowerShell SDK, what we have, a Pure Storage PowerShell SDK, into the VSS hardware provider or any SQL writer. So you can have that enabled to any application, and then you can take crash consistency, or if your application allows application consistency, you can do that as well, like similar to the SQL 2022, the T-SQL feature. So any database that you want to take a snapshot for. So how it works, simply by the admin who cares about which drive letter or data wants to back up needs to go and send out or execute a new volume set. A volume set is just, think about it as a logical group where I can group my volumes, right? Or my drive letters from someone who cares about just the drive letters or a mount point. So now the DBA has the D and A, which the data volumes and the log volumes. Put them in a volume set. Now I want to invoke a snapshot job. This will create me a protection group. Either I'm going to create a new one, or I can select an existing one. And then the second thing here, I want to utilize this. So I took a snapshot. So what is the use cases I have in mind? As a DBA, the first thing comes in mind, hey, I want to refresh my dev test to the latest version of my production database, right? So I might just go and create a new test VM and then just refresh that databases from my vVols attached volumes. the way to do that is just executing the mount snapshot set. The mount snapshot set is just going to tell me, hey, which volume set I want to take back the snapshot, and then go through, enumerate through the snapshot history, get that the latest one, and then mount it to a new server. So it can be back to the same server or any remote Windows machine, right? The last use case I want to mention here is we can take that protection group or the volume set that we protected and replicate it to a different protection group in a different flash array. So I can remotely send that, replicate it using replicate now. We have this flag there in the invoke snapshot job, or you can go and configure your protection group with replication frequencies or retention, however you want to do it. I'm going to go into a demo, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to take a backup of my Windows SQL database that has vvols-based disks attached to it. So the first thing I'm going to show you here is, let me skip a second. So the first thing I'm going to show you here is that this is my database. This is exactly what I'm going to protect, right? It can be one database. It can be multiple. The second thing I'm going to show you is now this database resides in the data Z. So this is the Z. This is the drive letter I want to protect. If I'm going to explore, this is where I have my data and log in the same file, which is not the best practice, but just for the demo now here. Now, as I mentioned, I want to create a volume set. In order to create a volume set, the best practice is to tie down that VM into its persistent ID. So if the friendly VM name will be changed, the ID won't be changed, right? So this is my source. I'm going to create now the volume set for my bath Z. So only one vvol will be inside this volume set, right? The second thing I want to do is invoking the snapshot job. Almost similar flags. It's just the only thing is now I'm going to create a B group because I don't have one already. I can pass it to an existing one, or I can do a best match. So I can go through a couple of protection groups that have already the disks. I just recorded this morning, and I think I have already the suffix, so I just need to change it. I'm just going to add something 2023. So now it's going to create my B group with this suffix in it. And every single protection group created by this commandlet is going to start with BSP. So if you have some auditing, you want to go through like what kind of snapshot I created with this backup module, I can do that. Now, I took a snapshot. Let me try to refresh my database. So I'm going to go back now to go through a couple of my snapshot history and get the latest. Right? So I'm going to refresh my dev test environment with the latest snapshot for my production. Then I'm going to do the mounts snapshot set. Pass the history ID. So this is the latest snapshot I've taken. As you can see, I choose a new path. So I didn't go to any other console. Everything from the Windows machine. So once I finish this, I can see that I have created a clone, attached the new volume to this host, and I created the disk, and I have the Y all within a second. Right? So I can go to D and data, and I can see, oh, this is my database is refreshed. Right? If you finish and you want to just dismount this, we have something else for you. So you just need to put the mount into a variable and then dismount the snapshot set. And just like that, once you click it, you're just going to see the Y drive disappear. All without even leaving my PowerShell. There you go. The Y disappear. Okay. Let me go back. So a couple of things I just want to have as a segue here. So just to iterate again, the main three functions, the new BSP volume set. So this is where I can group my volumes for a single server, or for the volumes that attach to the same virtual machine in one persistent group. I can pass here the volume type. So for now, we support the vvols, RDMs, or Ingress iSCSI, or the virtual fiber channels if you have a Hyper-V, you want to do some VHBA. So this is the only thing we support for the beta release. The second thing is the second command, which is the most important one, then invoking the snapshot job. As I mentioned, you can declare your volume set, declare the drive letters you want to take the snapshot for, and then select the protection group. The last one I'll mention here is the mount snapshot set. This is where I want to mount those snapshots I've taken to the same local machine or to a remote machine. So it can be to the same production group or to a different one. All right, so since this is a beta release, we would love for you guys to go and try it out. And I put here the link for where you can access the community page. We have a community page in Pure Storage where we actually post there some. You can see other users post their questions in the forum. Oh, this is exactly how we're going to be collecting the feedback. Or also, you can see the blogs we have there. So recently we have posted a blog about this. So you can go and see everything down there. And we would need to hear out your opinion, right? Because now we're supporting only Windows. So we just want to think: do you want Linux support? Do you want pure vSphere plugin supportability as well, so you can have this embedded into the vSphere client? So yeah, please let us know. And thank you for your time. Thank you. I will be around here if you have any questions. I have if you want to go into live demo, I have my sessions already, my remote sessions still enabled. So yeah, I will be around here. Or in Pure Storage 505 in the expo. Thank you.
How you guys doing? Good conference so far? You guys getting tired or you guys still have energy? Yeah? Okay, after lunch. My name is William Lam. I'm a senior staff solutions architect working VMware in our cloud infrastructure business group. Sort of cover a lot of different areas. Our core product is the VMware Cloud Foundation, obviously, but also some of our hyperscaler VMware Cloud solutions, some of our storage offerings, networking, et cetera. And this session is a little bit different. If you've attended some of these sort of VMTM Tech Talks, I figure that I want to give some of that time back to our users and our audience. So this is sort of a ask me anything, within reason, obviously. So obviously you guys showed up. Hopefully you guys have some questions. Anything that you guys are interested in, maybe things that you've heard about at the conference, maybe something that you've been trying to accomplish, maybe a problem or issue that you might have run into. But yeah, floors is yours. If not, we're going to be sitting here for 30 minutes. Anybody? Come on, there's a brave soul. There you go. There you go. Yeah, no, great question, and thanks for taking that first question. So I'll just repeat the question for everybody, especially for the recording. If I understood correctly, you're interested in sort of the VCDR, which is our disaster recovery solution. And then the gentleman was asking about sort of, there's some APIs there, and it sounds like you're typically automating with PowerShell then? And it's a little bit limited at this point in time, and you're just interested in, is there any further development, et cetera? Right, yeah. Yeah. I get in trouble when I talk about roadmap, because I just tell you what we're building now. Yeah, I'm actually familiar with that because, so I don't know if you're familiar that we actually had a VCDR, I think it's a PowerShell module that was released by VMware. I'm not sure if you were aware of that or not. It is, yeah. So today, the VCDR solution, we definitely have APIs. I think the initial focus was to provide some initial inventory APIs, so basically mostly Git APIs to be able to see my backups, to see the replication processes. And over time, we want to add more write APIs in there to be able to configure the sites and set up the entire configuration. So I know one of the engineering teams, they're both working on the API development and starting to expose this functionality. And then for ease of consumption, you can consume it as a RESTful API, or you can use the PowerShell module, which is currently open source, and they're constantly adding net new functionality to that. And so we can definitely talk offline and connect you with the product manager, because I think they would love to sort of hear what are the next set of APIs that you would like to kind of consume. And also from a tooling standpoint, you know, I know you're using PowerShell. Any other folks in the audience using PowerShell or PowerCLI? Okay, a lot of hands are with that. So typically really popular, but I know there's also other users that want to consume in Python, maybe Go, and even Java for that example. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for the question. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, man, what a question. So the question was, thank you for that, was sort of how do I keep up with all the things that I do from a blogging standpoint, hobbies, family, and all that kind of stuff. To me, it's sort of, it's a little bit of prioritization, but it's also just investing in time. You know, I can still remember when I was an admin, right? Like, I didn't always know the VMware APIs as well as I know it today, right? It's taken me a really long time to really learn about it. And day one, sort of like, oh man, I don't think I'm gonna be able to figure this out, right? And it's just spending a little bit of time, and you kind of have to figure out what is that amount of time, right? If you look at your entire week, how is that allocated? How much time are you spending in your day-to-day job? How much time are you spending on extra hobbies? And typically, I talk to a lot of customers where they wanna go from, I wanna automate, but I don't know where to start, And a lot of times, what we end up telling our customers and our users is to take a look at the things that are really mundane, the things that you do on a regular basis. And typically, the most basic things are like things like reporting. Coming in, is the environment healthy or not, right? And taking a look at that, because the nice thing about that from an automation standpoint is that you can learn about sort of read-only APIs where you're not going to affect the infrastructure. And just spending like an hour a week, or an hour a month that's dedicated to that, whether it's trying something out, maybe doing a hands-on lab, maybe doing a tutorial online. We're really lucky in 2023, you can pretty much learn anything on the internet, whether it's like YouTube, Pluralsight, and it's really dependent on sort of how you learn best. And for me personally, it's having a particular use case or business problem that I'm trying to solve for, and that's how I operate. When I was a customer, I would look at all the different things in my organization, and what are the things that it's like, man, this is something that I don't want to do, but it's something that you need to do, and it takes up so much of your time. These are really the low-hanging fruits to take a look at, and a lot of it was reporting. So when I got out of college and I joined my first company, they're like, you're not touching the VMware infrastructure. You just got out of college, right? And so they gave me access to vCenter, but I got a read-only account. You can't do a whole lot with read-only, right? And so as I was learning about the company and the different standard operating procedures that I had to learn about the infrastructure, I found out that every so often, hardware fails, right? Not really a surprise. And when that happens, vSphere HA takes over and VMs are restarted, right? We all know that, right? But there was an impact to the business. And that impact was, well, these are the VMs that were affected, they're restarted. Well, who are the system owners? Who are the application owners? What are the applications that they manage that they need to now go check to see if it's healthy? And what I found out was that we had a change management database. Not every organization has that, right? Sometimes it's on a spreadsheet. Sometimes you just don't know, and you're asking your colleague, like, hey, whose VM is this? And whoever was on call that weekend, you didn't want to have a host failure because you had to go and look up all this information. And sometimes these VMs were hosting 10, 20, 30, 50, 60 applications. And then we had to send an email one by one to say, hey, system owner, for this Windows VM, for this Linux VM, please go contact your application owners and check to see if the applications are up and running. And so that was sort of the opportunity that I saw coming out to say, well, I only have a read-only account. I can't do a whole lot. But I kind of knew, like, hey, is there a way to correlate the virtual machines, the system owner, and the application data? So I wrote some scripts to basically connect all that information out there so that when vSphere HA took over, one of the nice things about this vCenter event is it tells you all the VMs that were restarted. So I already got the list of VMs. I have the CMDB that has the VM name, the application owner, and all the different applications and the owners to each of those applications. Then it just became a really small task to basically put all the data together. And because each owner had an email address, I automatically generated a custom email report that said, your application, this version, these are your VMs that are affected. Please go log in and confirm it. And so something that would take hours, I don't even need to be awake for that to happen, right? And it was sort of these little tiny things. And again, it's not that I completed this whole task in one go. It took me several weeks to months to get this report going. But it was sort of like, can I query the VMs from vCenter? What does vCenter give me? Where is this information that I need to look for? Is it in a central place? Is it exposed as an API? We actually did not have APIs back then for the CMDB. So I had to learn SQL queries, right? And a lot of it I just did not know. So I had to go search online. And so it's spending a little bit of time, and over a month, couple of months' time, I arrived at the desired outcome with just the read-only account into the infrastructure. I was able to automate that task, and now that is one thing that anybody that was on call no longer has to kind of capture, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of these types of tasks that is still something that you need to deal with today in 2023. This is not a unique problem, right? And so it's really thinking about those very problematic things that you need to do, and how do you break up the problem into small chunks and then slowly attack the problem. And then over time, what I found was that, oh, there's this use case, there's this API I need to use. And over time, you start to build a better understanding of the product, which was vSphere at the time. But then obviously over time, we have things like Lab Manager, vSAN, and NSX. And so to date, somebody can say, hey, I want to automate this. I can tell you exactly where it is in the API, because I've been able to spend time learning about the foundation of how to do automation, and it just becomes easier and easier, right? So just like anything, you're not going to learn it day one, right? It takes practice. If you're playing an instrument, it's practice, practice, practice. And so same thing with automation. And for me personally, you know, back to the topic of like blogging, a lot of it is taking that and sharing that with others so that I've solved something, I can help you, and then maybe you might be able to use that solution to solve another particular problem. So I found that to be really insightful because it made sure that I can explain how something works, right? And ultimately share, and that's really why VMware is such a special community, right? Is that there's all these different bloggers that I'm sure you follow, even the ones that I follow, and it's really finding that balance, right? And so it's not like I'm constantly blogging. There's a lot of things that I work on where it's months, sometimes even years. And so what you see is just blogs getting published. What you don't see is the work behind it, right? So at the end of the day, it's hard work, right? But it's something that you just have to kind of build into your day-to-day lives and say, how much of that time am I going to invest in yourself? Ultimately, it's an investment in yourself, right? And I know that there are people who's like, you know what? I don't want to learn anything. I don't want to automate. That sounds like a developer, right? But I'm sure in all of your organizations, your managers are not saying, here's all these resources, here's all this funding you're getting. You're being asked to do more with less, right? And I think a really important skill set is to really think about where are the ways you can optimize, because once you solve those problems, you now have time back to now focus on new and interesting things, whether it's ARIA, whether it's networking security, private AI, maybe you want to do some Kubernetes. I know a lot of folks want to learn, but it's just like they have all these really mundane tasks that they haven't really solved, and so it prevents them from learning new things and kind of growing your skill set. So hopefully that helped answer your question. Yeah, and always have fun too, right? I do a lot of hiking. You know, I have 2 kids, so they keep me busy, but do a lot of hiking to get outside and get away from the computer. And for me, like sometimes when I get stuck, you know, doing something that's not technical is the best thing, because sometimes you'll just go out for a walk, go play with your kids, and then you're like, I've got the answer, and a lot of times you figure that out as well too. So yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, go for it. If I heard correctly, you were saying that these are lab environments. Are they like VMs or like in-user devices? I see. And specifically virtual machines, you mean? Okay. So the question was, you know, how do I provision workloads like VMs and kind of provide it to different teams for access, maybe for testing, dev tests, like very common use case. And how do I sort of manage that at scale before you apply that to maybe physical devices and all that, right? There's a couple of, it's a great question. It's a really classic, you know, dev test type of a use case, right? Like here's this VM or sets of VMs, collection of applications, and how do I reproduce that? And anybody here taken hands-on labs before? All right, that's exactly what we're doing, right? We take these VMs, we install applications on them. It could be VMware software, it can be third-party software. We create it into a template, right? And then we stamp it out, right, for every user. So every person that goes takes a hands-on lab, it's exactly the same, right? And it's for repeatability, but then there's also some benefits because we can now clone from it, and instantly you have a full vSphere environment, an ARIA environment, and so there's different ways of achieving that outcome, right? Typically what I'll ask customers is sort of, do you have a development team? You know, do you have a couple hundred developers that can build that for you? Typically the answer is no. And so you can do that, and I come from that world. You know, I used to work for a very large enterprise, and this was before the days of vCloud Director. And so we basically built our own version of vCloud Director using the vSphere APIs and doing things like linked clone, where you're able to basically do copy and write, so we can duplicate these workloads very, very quickly, just like you see in hands-on labs. But if you're not looking to build it yourself, there's different products and solutions. Like even the hands-on labs, I forget the offering, but they have their own offering where we'll manage the service for you. You bring your workloads and your templates, and you can use the infrastructure to basically deliver your own hands-on labs within your own organization. So that's one option. We also have our Cloud Director service. So this is vCloud Director that gives you this kind of multi-tenancy, capture these VMs and call via templates, and provides the same exact concept. And in fact, that's what the hands-on lab teams are using, right? So you can purchase something that you can run in your on-premises environment if that's what you need, or it can be a managed service where I don't want to run that infrastructure, but I want the ability to deploy those things. So that's another option. And then we also have a lot of partners who provide those capabilities, through their own custom tooling. And it's a really common request of saying, here are these workloads, right? And even something like ARIA automation, if you've got the VM templates, you can use something like ARIA automation to create these blueprints. And then you provide this self-service portal, right, to your end user to say, hey, I want this application stack. It's got all the database, everything fully configured. Maybe there's some input parameters and maybe there's some costing to it. And so these are all kind of the different options to achieve something of that particular outcome. Yeah. Hopefully that would help them. Okay, cool. Any other questions? Remember, this is your guys' time. If not, it's gonna be like another 14 minutes. Yeah, go for it.
Any recommendations of resources kind of going down that path? How do we achieve that?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, you should attend my home lab session because I'm actually going to cover some of those topics in there. But I'll repeat the question. It was sort of, he's got a home lab. He's interested in sort of exploring VMware Cloud Foundation. You've got a couple of large systems, basically. How best might you deploy VMware Cloud Foundation, whether it's onto the physical servers, whether I do it in a nested virtualization, so basically running VCF within VMs on top of your physical option. And it really just depends on sort of what outcome you're trying to look for. You can certainly use those boxes as is and deploy VMware Cloud Foundation. Now, for those that aren't familiar with the requirements for production workloads, they do require a certain number of nodes, anywhere from 4 to maybe up to 8 if you want to have a management domain as well as a workload domain. Now, if you just want experience with it, you don't actually need that number of hosts. And there's sort of 2 ways to achieve it. The first is to be able to use nested virtualization, right? So you can deploy multiple ESX VMs, and then that becomes your host where you then deploy VMware Cloud Foundation. You can certainly go down that path. But if you're constrained on resources, because I know not most people don't have infinite amount of resources, I certainly don't, then the other option is that you can actually deploy a subset of the components, right? And you can use different types of tools. There are some of these things in my blogs that covers how do you sort of deploy VCF, including the latest 5.x release, on a single host. And there's this really awesome toolkit called the Holo, it's like VMware Cloud Foundation Holo Toolkit, and it can all run in one physical host. And what it provides you is nested ESXi, but they also provide a virtual router, and that basically creates a bubble on this physical host. And so here, it does require a fair amount of memory, but certainly a lot less than if you were to deploy a physical VMware Cloud Foundation setup. So rather than 8 hosts, it's one physical host. You just need vanilla ESXi installed and a basic vSwitch. That's it. You download this toolkit completely free, and you run the script, and it deploys the full management domain as well as workload domain for you in like 2 hours' time. And this is literally production-grade deployments, but it's all happening in VMs. And because it's providing you virtual networking, there's no physical networking that you need to have. Just a regular ESXi host. You don't even need vCenter. So this is a great way to experience VMware Cloud Foundation. If you want to especially play with like VVSs, go through an upgrade scenario, play with NSX, right? And so that's sort of the one, the recommended path, because you will get the best experience of VMware Cloud Foundation because it's literally the full stack. There's no shortcuts. Now, if you're constrained on resources, you can make some tweaks to reduce the requirements of VMware Cloud Foundation. And I see you're smiling, so you were like, I like that. And so on my blog, I actually show you how you can actually deploy VCF on an Intel NUC with just 64 gigs of memory. Yeah. So there are definitely ways to optimize that, right? And so again, it all just depends on sort of what is your goal, what is your focus? Like, is it to learn about the VCF APIs? Is it to learn to how do I deploy a workload domain so I can deploy Kubernetes, deploy AI workloads? Is it to maybe test an upgrade? Maybe you want to go from 4.x to 5.x, or I'm going to go from 5.0 to 5.1. I want to see what that looks like. Don't do that in production. Set up a lab, go through that scenario. If you mess up, rebuild it again, right? And if you do it in nested, the really nice thing about nested, because I also have a Power CLI script that will deploy VCF for you. The nice thing about that is if you make a mistake, just delete it. Run the script again, in about an hour's time, you now have the full thing fully configured. right? So I'm a huge fan of automation, and why I continue to stress it, that it's not just for automating tasks that you have, but it helps you in your day-to-day job to understand this is the upgrade scenario. Your manager's asking you, like, how do you fall back? You can take screenshots. There's so many different use cases for it. And so those are kind of the different ways. And I've got some other topics, but I do have a home lab session for tomorrow. If you weren't able to make the breakout session earlier on Monday, I do have another session tomorrow if you want to look in this calendar. That's all about how to run all these different VMware solutions on top of home lab gear, like an Intel NUC. And it's literally every product that we have, you can run it because it's software, right? And the point here is that you don't need to have a very expensive lab to be able to learn about these technologies. And so if you guys are interested, definitely recommend sign up for that session if you're interested. Yeah. Oh, VCF HoloKit. Yeah, if you search for it on my blog, it's also on there, but it's something that the technical marketing team for VMware Cloud Foundation, they produce it. And it's a fantastic tool because you download it, you bring your Windows ISO image, it basically creates a jump host for you, sets up Active Directory, all the networking policies, and so once you're done, you can basically RDP into the system, and you've got the full VCF deployment there. And you can do multiple versions of these deployments. So we actually have some of our partners using this toolkit to deliver training for their organization. And because it just requires a single physical host, as long as you meet the memory requirements, it sets everything up for you. Yeah. So really neat solution. So I really like that one. Yeah. It's a home state of the union for home labs. Yeah, or you just search my name. It should. I think. Yeah, I don't remember what time it is tomorrow, but yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Oh, it's not. I don't know the time. It comes up as a CTEX section. Oh, you know what? I think it's not. You know what? I think it's not schedulable in the app, but it. I'll need to find, yeah, maybe I can find a way for them to email everybody who registered here if you're interested in the session. But there is a session tomorrow, but I don't know if it's actually schedulable in the app itself. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah. Any other questions? Yep. Yep.
From your point of view, what is the best way to automate vCenter post-configuration tasks, such as Active Directory integration, managing role, permission, all those kind of stuff? Because sometimes I use on Ansible, sometimes API calls, sometimes I need to go on my SSH vCenter to run some tasks. What is the best way for you?
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, I think you were asking, what is the best way to automate configuration changes to vCenter? Is that correct? Yeah. No, that's a great question. So obviously vCenter has a number of different API surfaces, right? And so vCenter, and I'm assuming you're asking about vCenter configurations, not so much the workloads, right? So vCenter itself has an appliance API that allows you to basically manage things like networking, NTP, syslog, backups, and that's a RESTful API. And that covers most of the configurations you would normally do, including things like backups. I don't know if that's something that you're interested in or if there's some other ones. There are some other settings that we may not have APIs, but the really nice thing about the vSphere platform is that while vCenter is a product that has its own APIs, the other interesting thing to keep in mind is that vSphere is a platform. And vCenter, if you look at it, it's just another VM that's got an OS on it. It's got VMware tools. And there's this really powerful API called the Guest Operations API. And so I would use that API in conjunction with the vCenter APIs for things that you need to do inside of the guest. I'll give you a good example. Some Linux systems, when they go into read-only mode, it'll prompt you with like a login, you need to type a password or something like that, and it just gets stuck. So that means you as an admin need to open up the console, type something, close it up. And if you have a lot of those VMs, it's really difficult to automate. But using the Guest Operations API, I can actually send in keys, strokes into the VM as if you're sitting there and typing. In fact, if you want to scare your colleagues, you can do that. And this API operates at lower level than the virtual hardware, so it doesn't need VMware tools to be running. So you can send in keys, and so I've been able to automate things that are just unautomatable. In fact, I was able to automate, some configurations for Windows 3.1, which has no VMware tools on it, right? And so using this particular API, you can send in keystrokes, so passwords, and so you can use things like OCR to take a picture, because we actually have an API that allows you to take a screenshot of the VM. And you can say, yep, this VM has crashed, or Linux kernel panic. And with all the different technologies today, you can go through an OCR process to decode that image, translate it into basically text, and then you can parse it out and say, oh, this VM has gotten stuck. Let me go look up its password, use the API to send the keys, and I fully automate it. And the reason I tell you that is that you can really go through a lot of different types of things that were just, there's no API for to do that. But using this guest operations API and even sending these keystrokes, you're now able to automate things that weren't possible before. And so going back to your question, there are a lot of things that we don't have APIs for, unfortunately, for vCenter. But because of this lower level platform API, and because vCenter has VMware tools, I can do certain types of automation that just isn't possible. So now I can actually automate something that was not automatable. And you can take that and apply that to other types of workloads, right? So depending on the use case, right? Like if I've got a VM that has VMware tools, I can use this guest operations API and interact with it. And it doesn't bypass security. You still need to log in. So you have to have a valid login, right? So if you don't have a login or if you don't have the permissions, you're not gonna be able to do anything with it. And then in other cases, you'll be able to use the lower level APIs to send keystrokes. So these are some examples on how you can do that. I'm getting the wrap up. So again, I really want to thank you for your time and really awesome. Thank you for the questions.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, my name is Ivan Jordanov. I am Engineering Director in VMware for Data Protection, SRM, vSphere Replication, and Site Recovery Service to VMware Cloud on AWS. I will be talking about what's new in data protection space and where are we going. They asked me to complete in 12-13 minutes, so any questions you might have, we can take it after that off the stage. I'm starting with VMware portfolio in data protection. So we have 3 major offerings. Even there are 4. I didn't include here VCDA, VMware Cloud Director Availability, because it is part of VCPP program. But I'm starting with VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery. This is cost-efficient service to VMware Cloud and AWS. We replicate the data directly from on-prem to S3 bucket in AWS. That's why it is cost-efficient. It doesn't require leaving SDDC, leaving vCenter at the target site. And with VCDR, we offer the very popular and famous ransomware recovery. There are a lot of sessions about VCDR and ransomware. I'm not going into details more about VCDR. Next is VMware Site Recovery. It is more optimized with better performance, higher cost service, again to VMC on AWS. It requires leaving SDDC, leaving vCenter on protected and recovery site all the time, but it provides very quickly and efficiently and easy protect, reprotect, failback, failover here and there from site A to site B and from site B to site A. Recently we announced 1-minute RPO with VSR, Site Recovery Service. With VCDR, currently we can have up to 15 minutes RPO. And we have Site Recovery Manager. This is from a long time product on top of Orchestrator, on top of ABR, array-based replication, or vSphere replication. In blue, you can see the supported topologies, and in green, you can see the supported clouds. VCDR actually also supports from source side Google Cloud and Azure and Outpost for AWS. Site Recovery Service is supported from AWS, Outpost, and Site Recovery Manager is supported in so-called hyperscalers for Azure, Google Cloud, and Oracle Cloud Solution. So what happens if you want to use more than one solution? It's complicated. You should have different license currently. You should have different deployment onboarding. So today we announced VMware Live Recovery offering. It essentially combines all our offerings in a subscription-based service. You can still have your on-prem to on-prem SRM with array-based replication, for example. You can just subscribe, convert to subscription, and continue using your existing private data center. But the benefit is that with this same license, with this same solution, you can use also some VMs, even same VMs for VCDR for ransomware. So essentially, you can just decide one VM when you protect, to what target to protect. You can protect to Site Recovery Service on AWS up to 1-minute RPO. You can protect with VCDR, or you can just keep protecting your SRM with array-based replication in your private data center. And as part of that, as I mentioned, this was heavily requested feature. I've always been asked, can I protect same VM? I have array-based replication with SRM from site A to site B, and I want this same VM to also protect for ransomware. Now, this is possible as part of wife recovery solution. And then now I want to highlight the new features in vSphere application and site recovery service. We recently introduced 1 minute RPO. This was heavily requested feature. So a few years ago we announced 15 minutes, then 5 minutes, but with the existing architecture, this was the limit, 5 minutes. Below 5 minutes, it was not possible because of some limitations how we consolidate the redo logs at the target site. So we had to re-architect almost everything to achieve 1 minute RPO. I will be talking about this new architecture in a while. What I want to highlight now, it was announced only for site recovery servers for AWS as source and as a target. So now it's also available for any source. You can have your on-prem private data center to site recovery service for VMware Cloud and AWS. And soon, it's very modern now to use this term, soon it will be also available for on-prem to on-prem with wife recovery, new offering that I just mentioned. As part of this re-architecture that I mentioned, we also allowed automatic scale out and auto balanced mode. What I mean? In the past, when you configure a new replication, you can select auto assign. So HBR server at the target site can select the most suitable host-based replication server. But at the end, if you have, let's say, 10 replications, and you want to rebalance, you had to do it manually. Just host-based replication servers, they didn't know about the other servers. So either you had to do it manually, or you can auto-assign for newly created replications. We introduced, with this new architecture, automatic scale-out. So if you have hosts available in your cluster, and there is a demand, we can just use this new host for the new replications. And we introduced one new component, so-called connection broker, who can auto-balance the replications all the time. I will go now more technical details about what I'm talking. This is the current old-school architecture of vSphere replication. So we have so-called vSCSI filter at the source side, where we track the changes at the VM level, and we send the changes to the target site. Target site, vSphere application management server. This server, through NFC, network file copy service, writes the changes in the underlying storage at the target site, and underlying data store. So if you want to scale out, you had to manually deploy new vSphere replication server and configure the replications through this server. And the supported scale was up to 4,000 replications with 10 host-based replication servers. So around 400 replications per vSphere replication management server. What was the challenge? If you wanted to use lower RPO, for example, if we try 1 minute, the data we receive, we started receiving the data quickly than the consolidation time to consolidate the logs in the base disks at the target site. So we had to change something more globally. So what we did with so-called enhanced vSphere replication, and this enhanced vSphere replication, again, it will be available. It is now available for site recovery service for VMware Cloud and AWS, and it will be available for wife recovery offering, the new offering. So we introduced directly data path from the source ESX to the target ESX. And now, with the new enhanced vSphere replication, the replication service is built directly inside the ESX as a VIP component, if you are familiar. So the data path now is directly from source ESX to the target ESX through connection broker. And this new connection broker, it provides the balancing and the auto scale out mode that I was talking about. So the only important new requirement to use this new enhanced vSphere application is to allow connectivity from source ESX, from all source ESXs you replicate VMs, to all target ESXs you receive this replication. We also support, you can tag a given host to disallow ESX for a replication. If you don't want to use a set of ESX hosts, you can just tag them to disallow this host for replication. If not, they will be enabled for replication, and we can auto scale out the replications using this host at the target site. We are almost done with the time, so I just want to highlight the sessions during VMware Explore in Barcelona. There was a great tutorial yesterday. I would recommend you to join our session with Zdravko, who is engineer in vSphere application team, about automating REST APIs, automating configuring replications and NDR workflows using REST APIs and PowerCLI commands. It was heavily requested in the past, and we also prepared some samples available in the public repository for you. And okay, that's all. Thank you. If you have any questions, feel free.
Okay, guys, welcome. Sorry about the technical difficulties. Welcome to VMware Horizon in 12 minutes. I'm going to explain VMware Horizon based on the use case we actually did, and I'm going to try to fit this all in 12 minutes. If I can't make it, please be sure to contact me in some way, shape, or form. I'll be here all week. We all need a disclaimer, so please read it carefully. I'll get it out of the way. Thanks to my good friend Wouter Kirsten. He's not here at the moment, I think, but you get the idea. All right, let's go. This is me. I'm a technical architect at PQR, and I do all sorts of stuff with VMware Horizon. If you want to know anything else about me, come talk to me. I'm keeping this short because of the small time frame. Also, if there's any questions, please save them after the session, because the time frame is really short. So, we all need this week to have some AI in our sheets, so I guess I managed. Sorry. Okay, I'm gonna tell you a story, and it's not a fairy tale, it's a thing that actually happened. So this is about a company. They do all sorts of really brilliant things with 3D scanning. They mount that stuff on drones, and they generate a lot of data. A lot of data. Those data sets are sometimes a terabyte in size and more. So it takes a lot of CPU, graphics, and whatnot to process this stuff. You need GPUs, you need CPUs, and you need a lot of fast storage to be able to process that data. And even then, their data sets, to manage them, would sometimes take hours. They would use big laptops, the big mobile workstations, to be able to do this. But once they start getting into those data sets and try to do anything with them, that mobile workstation is fully loaded. CPU 100%, GPU 100%, so they can't do anything else for hours, literally. So even sending an email during a generative state like that would be nearly impossible. Well, and then COVID hit. Their data is all in their centralized data center. They weren't allowed to go into the office anymore, so they couldn't actually download the data to their laptops. What did they do? They actually got some USB hard drives. Bear with me. They copied the data to the USB hard drives, and they started driving around the country to be able to give that data to their colleagues. Now that's horrible. I mean, in terms of security, that data just went out the door. That's horrible. So how do we solve this? We took all that stuff and we centralized it. We put it into a server into their data center. I also asked, because this is about what Horizon is, I asked ChatGPT what it thinks Horizon is. Well, I think the description is really accurate, because it just allows you to remote into your either applications or desktops remotely from any device, remember? So talking about Horizon, this is a sheet I usually use to explain this to customers. It looks really complicated, but trust me, it's not. There's actually just a few components and a few things that you need on the side, like Active Directory, like DNS, like NTP, all the things that should be working anyway, right? Okay. So what it actually looks like is this. You can just use your either VI desktop or application from anywhere you want and from any device you want. So just sit back, relax, and enjoy your VDI. So what this meant for them, once they had Horizon up and running, and this was of course including a big GPU for their data sets, they could access their data, and their data did not need to move outside of the office anymore. The server that VDI was running on was actually in the exact same rack as where their file server with all those data sets was. With a 10 or even a 25 gigabit link between them, loading those data sets would be way, way faster. I mean, they downloaded it to their laptops, and in their office they actually had a few 100 megabit connections. So downloading a terabyte of data and uploading it again, and downloading it again, and uploading it again, that's horrible. This way, they could easily open those data sets, do something with it, and there you go. In terms of productivity, the official numbers is that they gained about 30% in productivity in their projects, because they could now actually, from that laptop, just do their email, do their Teams, whatever, and also start not one, but even 2 or 3 VDI sessions, doing all of that work simultaneously. So that, I think the numbers are way higher. Security, I just gave you the example of the USB drive, which they drove around the country. They don't need to do that anymore. It's now centralized and kept in their secure data center with a secured desktop, with a secured way of connecting into that environment. Because of course, all sorts of two-factor authentication are actually able to be used. It's Radius, it's SAML, it's, what's the other one, RSA. It's all capable. So, and this is the end result for them. They can now work wherever, whenever, from any device, be it a iPad or a Chromebook or even an Android phone would work, just to be able to access that data in a secure way. So one thing other I want to mention to you guys is, who of you here knows that the VMware Fling site was discontinued? See a couple of hands, but not too many. The Fling site is now offline. It redirects to I think a GitHub page. So if you want to use the Flings, and who of you here knows what those Flings are, by the way? Show of hands. Okay. So VMware Flings was a site on which a lot of VMware people made all kinds of handy tools available, not productized, but just without support, that you could download there and use in your environment. They had tools for Horizon, for Workspace ONE, for migrations, and a lot of other VMware stuff as well. But like I said, the Fling site is now discontinued. So for you guys, for the EUC tools, you can find them on TechZone now. So if you want to note this, please do. If you don't know them, please look them up. There are very many handy tools in there that you might be able to use in your environment. If you want to know something about the other tools, please look at my previous session of yesterday as well, because I talked about 2 features within VMware Horizon that actually nobody knows about. Who here knows of VMware Horizon recording? Okay, no one. Who here knows about VMware Horizon Logon Monitor? 1. Okay. Suggestion to all of you, please go and look at my previous session. They will be recorded. They will be available on the vBrownBag YouTube channel. Because I'll explain to you, those components are by default in the Horizon stack and usable for your infrastructure. One is to actually completely record a session, and the other one is to, who here has ever had to troubleshoot a slow logon in their environment? Thought so. Okay, that logon monitor is just a service you can enable by default, and it shows you all the logon information you want. It's in there by default, so please take a look. I see I'm going too fast. Cool. If you want to catch up with me, please connect with me in either this way or look me up in person here. This is a mandatory sheet as well. Please take the survey in the app, so I know I did a good job or not. And for now, that's all.
Hi everyone, my name is Girish Manmadkar. I'm part of VMware CIBG business unit focusing on various AI solutions with partners like Kyndryl. You must have heard in the morning that we have few partners that we have started working with. Delivering a platform is one thing that we do really well, that you all know, but also in the private AI space, we want to make sure that we have the partner delivering additional value on top of it with various applications, various use cases, various models that they can execute it on top of it for you as a customer. So here with me, I have Venkat from Kyndryl as well as Pietro. They are going to go present and talk about how they have leveraged VMware Private AI Foundation stack to do a little bit more beyond what customer use cases are. And I think you will benefit more from them. So Venkat, all yours.
Thank you, Girish. Good afternoon, everyone. So basically, I'm going to take you through, what we have essentially done from the private AI standpoint, which you must have all already heard. Back in Las Vegas, a couple of months ago, VMware made an announcement on the private AI, specifically, providing the Gen AI capability. Which is something that we essentially, took the private AI reference architecture. We built our own reference architecture based on that particular piece of work. And then we further implemented, the overall solution, and which is what we are going to get into. So essentially, a lot of our clients, as we look at, the AI has become an integral component of their overall, strategy from the digital transformation perspective, and which is something that they are adopting it, and trying to look at further from the traditional AI enterprise AI applications to more of Gen AI application or generative AI application. So what are the kind of key challenges that really need to be addressed, right? So the few things that we put it here from the perspective of, the data sovereignty, specifically addressing the data privacy, the data locality, the data access. So there need to be some kind of guardrails that we really need to put around that, right? Which is something that need to be essentially addressed. And then, based on where you run it, right, in terms of, how do you do the cost optimization, in terms of building your model, training your model, and then running your model, from on-prem to the public cloud, and then further, the technical debt. So the AI itself on the generative AI with all the complex stack that, you have, there are a lot of new tools, new components that are going to be brought forward as part of the solution. How do you essentially, maintain and manage, and then build the new applications, etc., right? So that essentially requires a lot of effort in terms of how do we address. And the other thing is the performance consideration aspect, which is really important from the GPU acceleration perspective. How do you optimize it in order to reduce the cost footprints or optimize the cost versus performance? So that is another dimension that need to be looked at. And last but not the least, primarily from the developer perspective, how do we improve the developer productivity, essentially by looking at various tooling to make acceleration from the applications development standpoint. So these are all the elements that need to be really kept in mind when you try and adopt and build these applications. So prior to, we looked at the Gen AI components or Gen AI stack, we have been implementing the AI and ML stack for the last couple of years, working with VMware and NVIDIA. As you can look at it from the top down, our approach and architecture is essentially looking at from the applications down to the infrastructure. And then, the platform for AI, how would you essentially provide that? So if you really look at it, from the applications perspective, you can have the traditional VM-driven applications or the more modernized applications which are containerized. So essentially, we need to be able to help support the Kubernetes platform, which is what we try to leverage here with the vSphere with Tanzu as the underlying foundation on top of the VMware VCF, VMware Cloud Foundation. And then with the NVIDIA Enterprise AI Stack that contains all of the core components necessary to support your enterprise AI applications, and then provide the MLOps kind of services, with the TensorFlow, the PyTorch, etc. So further, as we look at, which is what you would have seen, in the morning, based on what Chris Wolf presented, this is the private AI reference architecture, which is something that VMware has essentially created. As you look at the previous stack that we have essentially built, this is just an addendum to what we already have. So we have, added our NeMo, NVIDIA NeMo to that. In addition, all the large language models that need to be built are layered on top of the existing stack. So if you really look at, with NVIDIA NeMo, it is essentially the core NVIDIA AI Enterprise as the underlying foundation, right? So on top of which you have the NeMo framework that will support the large language models. So that's what we try to create, a reference architecture, which is something that Pedro is going to take you through. And then further, what are the services that we have essentially built around that framework, and then how you can leverage in the real environments. With that, Pedro.
Thanks, Venkat. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, good. So now I will deep dive a little bit more in the reference architecture that we did not create it, but that we are leveraging for our solution, together with a set of assets that we created for deploying, facilitating the deployment of the solution. So first of all, let me say that this reference architecture is not just for Gen AI. We started developing this reference architecture several months ago for what we call the enterprise AI or predictive AI type of use cases that are essentially, the typical problems in classification or clustering, typical problems like, spam detection, prediction, this type of things. And then we have evolved to add the Gen AI piece. Now, before we deep dive into the reference architecture, I don't know if you are already familiar with the difference between traditional AI and the Gen AI. Just a couple of words, just to make clear which are the key drivers for Gen AI with respect to the traditional AI. So traditional AI, as I was saying, we are referring to machine learning algorithms or even deep learning algorithms, like the type of regression algorithms or k-mean algorithms, all these type of algorithms for machine learning, as well as algorithms for deep learning. But the key difference between these algorithms and the Gen AI algorithms, because also the Gen AI algorithms are based, if you want, on deep learning technologies, but the key difference is in the size of the training model. That makes a huge difference. Let's take the example of a simple algorithm for the prediction of the price of a house, right? So you have all your parameters. That is, the first one is the price of the house, and then you have other parameters like the size, the square meters, how many rooms, how many bathrooms, is there a garden, a terrace, these type of things. You get these parameters, you feed into your model, and then let's assume that you're using a linear regression model. With these parameters, you can fine-tune the function to predict, the prediction function. And then here, you are using something like a dozen of parameters, maybe 50 parameters, in the worst case, 100 parameters. With Gen AI, we are talking of algorithms that are dealing with billions of parameters. So you need to think to matrix of billions of data that are ingested into the system and are processed by the several elements of a deep learning, of a neural network. So this requires, first of all, parallelisms, and second, hardware accelerations. If you think that the first large language models that was developed, these models was taking months to be trained for the first time. So this requires really a huge computation capability. So now, say that, let's see which are the key elements of our solution. So obviously the hardware. In the hardware part, the key element are the GPU cards and the network acceleration, network accelerated cards from NVIDIA. And on top of that, we have the virtualization layer with VMware that can be either based on vSphere or on VCF. Doesn't make so much difference. Then, obviously, once we have our virtualization layer, we can use either virtual machines or containers. We will see that containers are a critical part of the solution because they allow the scalability of the solution. And then, now that we have our, let's say, base infrastructure, then we need to leverage, we need to add the key components for the machine learning or Gen AI modeling and training. And these are provided by the NVIDIA AI Enterprise Framework that provides a set of services for the data ingestion, data preparation in general, for the data training, for the model training, as well as for the model optimization and running the model, that is the model inference. So these are the major capabilities provided by the NVIDIA AI Enterprise Framework. NVIDIA Enterprise Framework provides also a set of foundational models in many different areas. These are free, included into the NVIDIA AI Enterprise Suite. And then for the specific large language model, Gen AI models, there is the NVIDIA NeMo, that is a framework that contains a lot of pre-trained models that you can use to generate, to fine-tune your own models. So you can use this as a starting point. And then there are also other capabilities like, for example, the NeMo guardrails that allows you to make sure that your model is stick to particular rules and doesn't derail from particular rules. Then finally, Kubeflow. Kubeflow is also an important element of the architecture because this allows you to implement what is called MLOps. It's the equivalent of DevOps for machine learning, right? And it's very important because it allows you to automate the different phases in the creation of your Gen AI and AI application. And finally, you can eventually leverage open source models from Hugging Face or Llama 2, whatever you want to use. So now let's see how these are deployed. Obviously, we don't need all the components everywhere. If, for example, if we want just to run the inferences, so if we want to evaluate your model in an edge location, we just need very tiny components that will be run at the edge location. It's different if we want to run, for example, the training or the fine-tuning for a large language model, because this will require a considerable amount of resources. So this is something that you cannot run at your edge site. This is something that you need to run on your data center. So depending which type of capabilities you want to run, we will deploy different components in the different locations, right? So now let's see which are these components. Okay, here the base are ESXi hosts, right? And the NVIDIA GPU cards and NVIDIA DPUs. So the first thing that we do is we install the NVIDIA drivers on the ESXi hosts to make sure that the ESXi host is able to recognize and work with the GPUs and the network accelerated cards. Once this is done, the SXIOs are ready to host either a vSphere environment, I mean, you don't need a VCF environment, or if you want to use, for example, hyperconverged storage, you can use vSAN. In this case, we recommend to use vSAN 8 ESA because it provides better performance, especially for GenAI. Or if you are dealing with huge quantity of training data, in this case, it's recommended to use external storage, maybe some object storage where you can keep this data, because it depends on the size of the data, obviously. But vSAN ESI is a very convenient and very fast storage for doing the training. For what concerns the networking, as I say, this works with plain vSphere, so either with the VDS vSphere networking or with NSXT. Let's say that from a solution perspective, doesn't make so much difference if you're using VDS or NSXT. Okay, now we have the vSphere environment. This is prepared to leverage the accelerated hardware. Then at this point, we can create directly what we call the deep learning, are called the deep learning VMs, that are VMs enabled for the accelerated hardware, so they are configured to take advantage of the GPUs and the DPUs. And on top of that, we deploy the NVIDIA AI framework, the NeMo framework, if you want to run GenAI applications. And so this is one way of setting up your environment. You create a deep learning VM, you have everything you need to run your AI applications, to train or run your AI applications or Gen AI applications. The other way that we recommend is to use Tanzu, so to use containers. The reason behind that is because containers are more scalable, right? And so are better suited for parallel processing type of processing, especially for Gen AI applications. So in this case, the vSphere with Tanzu is enabled to take advantage of the GPUs, right? So we need to create particular VM classes for the workload clusters to leverage the GPUs. And then on top of that, as containers, we can deploy the NVIDIA AI Enterprise, all the components of the NVIDIA AI Enterprise that you see in green on the right part, including the NeMo framework, and then TensorFlow, PyTorch, Triton, NeMo guardrails, whatever is included into the AI Enterprise can be deployed there. Then, always as a containerized application, we deploy the Kubeflow in a separate cluster, and this can manage the LMOps operations in your environment. And then another important component is the Ray cluster. Ray is an application that makes, is used to parallelize Python code. So it's very, very used, much used by the in the machine learning development phases. Okay, and then on top of that, we can plug also the traditional open source models that are used for Gen AI. Okay, very quickly, the added value that we are providing is that we have automated almost all the phases of the deployment and configuration of this environment. Of the previous picture that you have seen, like for example, we have automated via Ansible, using some Ansible automations, the preparation of the ESXi, the creation of the templates, the creation of the Tanzu cluster enabled for GPUs, the deployment on NVIDIA AI Enterprise, the different operators deployment, up to the installation and configuration of MLOps for your environment. So, everything is automated, and to set up this type of environment, we can do this in less than 1 hour, well, a little bit more, but, in a very few time. If you need to do that from scratch, it takes really a significant amount of time. Okay, so these are the assets that we have developed and that we use internally for ourselves, let's say, in our customer engagements to facilitate the implementation at some particular customer. This includes obviously a reference architecture that can be customized for the specific customer needs. Automation scripts. These are mostly Ansible based, right? And deployment guides, either manually to implement the solution and configure the solution manually, or automatically via the automations, and then bill of materials and some promotional video. Okay, then now I give back the stage to Venkat.
Yeah. So thanks, Pedro. So a couple of things. So first of all, Kyndryl's private AI reference architecture has been officially approved by VMware. And in fact, if you have heard earlier today in Chris Wolf's keynote, he already mentioned about that. Like, we are part of the AI private AI ecosystem. And in fact, the automation to build the entire stack that that reference architecture, I think, which is very important from a repeatability standpoint, right? And to avoid a lot of errors while you deploy and run your applications and you build your applications, you want that process to be very, very simplified. So we have the entire automation pretty much available at the push of a button. But I think that is key in terms of our capabilities that we bring in, right, for helping you if you wanted to deploy, manage that infrastructure, and then the application and the services. Along with that, like the data foundation, the LLM ops service from the large language model standpoint, these are all very critical. So Kyndryl can provide the services end to end from the life cycle perspective, from the consulting, implementation, and the modernization. Any applications you have, we will go and then modernize those applications, because that is essentially where the Tanzu Kubernetes really come into picture, and which is something that we have full set of assets even with Tanzu application platform. Essentially, that will support some of these applications to run on top of it. So bottom line, end to end, we provide these services across the entire life cycle, from application down to the infrastructure. And lastly, since this is a complex, kind of an environment, and the Gen AI, it takes a village to really bring these services, right? So the partner ecosystem and the assets that we have, the skill sets, which is something that we as Kyndryl bring to the table from the perspective of, the assets that Pedro talked about from the automation standpoint, and the reference architecture, which is absolutely critical, because that's what helps to address some of the challenges that I have outlined in the beginning of the this thing. And then we bring the alliance partners, like NVIDIA, and then other ISV partners to really work together to solve your end-to-end problems. So with that, I will open up to any questions that you have. No question. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christian Moen. As it says over here, I'm the chief technologist for SDDC, or Software Defined Data Centers in Proact in Norway. I recently kind of stumbled down the rabbit hole with ARIA Automation Config, or as you might know it as Salt Stack or Salt. All those names kind of get intertwinkled, and the name changes and everything. So basically, what I'm going to do is talk a bit about how I've used Salt without doing anything with ARIA Automation. So it's basically just ARIA Automation Config, which is Salt, and not a VRA session as such. I started doing this a while ago, and then just kind of fell into a lot of kind of weirdnesses and fun things you can do with it. So I have some demos, not live, I'm afraid. They're recorded. One of the reasons for that is I have 27 minutes. The last time I did this talk, I used 55, and I did a live demos. So I've cut down on the demos and done videos, and I hope I'll make it on time. They'll brutally cut me off once my time is out. So this is me. Everything I show here is on GitHub. I'll also repeat those QR codes at the end of on my last slide as well. And that's my blog there. You can follow me on Twitter or X or whatever it's called today. There, and let's go. So ARIA Automation Config, as I mentioned, is basically Salt. And the architecture for Salt looks like this. The concept is basically that you have a master and minion kind of scenario where the master can do commands to a minion. A minion is akin to an agent or something like that. And then the minion can respond with information or do specific tasks. There's a lot of possibilities in here that I'm not going to cover, but I'm going to go through a few of the basic concepts and show some demos of some of it. These are kind of the core pillars or concepts in Salt. You have the master, which I mentioned, the central control bus. That's where all the action happens. That doesn't happen on the minions. The minion is the client or agent. And then you have something called a state, which is basically a recipe for something you want to happen on a minion. The minion can be different OSs or different kinds of equipment. I'll get back to that. But it's a recipe to do something on a minion. A high state is a combination of states combined into a overlaying high state. This is what you want all these minions to look like. So it's a collection of states. The information you get back from a minion gets stored in a grain. So most of the terminology here comes from the salt mineral. So it's salt grains and pillars. The pillars are the next one. That's information that you keep on your master that you want your minion to be able to consume. For instance, usernames, passwords, secrets. Things you don't want stored on the minion itself, but things you want to query the master for and get that information back if you have access to it. Beacons is a way of monitoring non-salt events and processes on a minion. So if a file changes, if someone changes the host file, if someone adds a file to somewhere, edits a file, whatever, the beacon can send that signal to the reactor that then does something based on what's changed. So that's what you can use to basically have a known state or known good state, a validated state for something, and it will revert those changes back if that's what you want. Or you can go crazy with it and say that if someone adds something to the host file, do something weird. You could do anything. It doesn't have to be related to the event that sparked the reaction. So you could do anything. So if someone puts a file in there, do that with that API somewhere else. That's fine. Well, what I'm gonna focus on here are the states. There's the recipes for the minion, how you can use recipes to have something happen on a minion from the Salt Master. So that's what my demos are for. If I'm going to go through all of this, 27 minutes won't cut it. So I'm going to focus on that. So how do you deploy this? Salt is open source project, but ARIA automation config is something you get with the VRA license. So you can use this if you have VRA in your environment as well. So I'm focusing on that part because I haven't been using the open source project so much. I've been using the ARIA automation config, but everything I do here can be done in Salt natively as open source as well. So you can deploy it via ARIA Suite Lifecycle, like you do with all the other ARIA products. It deploys it then in a single master node. You can deploy a second master node and then cluster them afterwards. But you can't deploy a cluster by itself. You have to do that in 2 steps. The minimum requirements for that appliance are pretty decent. 16 vCPUs and 32 gigs of RAM if you want to test it. It runs with a lot less. But the ARIA Suite Lifecycle Manager won't allow you to downsize it. So if you're like me, you have a home lab with nodes with 64 gigs of RAM in it, there might not be enough resources available. So the trick is, use Lifecycle, have it deploy it, then it won't be able to power it on. You edit the appliance, turn down the RAM requirements, the CPU requirements, power it on, and Lifecycle Manager will just continue. And it works. So it's a small little step there if you want to have it in a lab environment and you don't have that kind of resources available to you. The minion requirements are somewhat different. There aren't any specific requirements other than operating systems and supported devices. I haven't found anything that says how much memory the minion requires or how much disk space. It's a small little package. It doesn't take much resources at all. So there are no specific kind of memory requirements for that. It supports Windows, Linux, Mac OS, AIX, which I'm sure a bunch of you run still, I hope. And then there's the proxy. The proxy is basically a Linux-based minion that can talk to something else. And you proxy the minion commands from the master through the proxy and to the end device. An example for that is something called Napalm. Napalm is basically an abstraction layer you can put in front of your network switches. So it could be Cisco, Juniper, and different kind of networking equipment. But you talk to the Napalm abstraction layer, and then it translates into the correct Juniper or Cisco commands. So you can use Salt to do that as well, with switch config. VMware has an SDDC module for this that makes it able to talk to vCenters and ESXi hosts. That's also done through a proxy because you can't actually install the minion on an ESXi host. Or you can install it on the vCenter, but you don't want to do that. But it's possible to do. But the second thing is, by default, it looks for Salt. Salt.whatever your domain name is locally. So if you go home now and create a DNS entry for Salt and start monitoring that, you'll figure out all of your appliances or whatever that has the Salt minion installed, because that's where the default goes looking for it. So if you're security conscious, you might, I don't use Salt, you might want to create that DNS entry and make sure no one can change it. Because if someone stands up a Salt master in your environment and you have minions looking for it, they get root access to that machine the moment you actually accept it on the server, on the master. So that's something to be aware of, even if you don't run Salt. The communication from the minion to the master, or vice versa, goes over these 2 TCP ports. That's it, nothing else. There is no SSH, there is no RDP, there is no other protocols. It's the Salt protocol on those 2 ports. And it's end-to-end encrypted. So that's all you need. A few lessons learned before the demos. Have a test environment. Also for, not just for the minions when you test your recipes and states, but also for the master. It's really, really easy to destroy the ARIA automation config master and bring it into some kind of weird state that you're not going to be able to use it. It takes one command. So at least snapshot it before you try something strange, or have a test environment for it. One example is if you actually go right now, install the latest version of this ARIA automation config, and then go Googling for how do I enable the SDDC module for VMware. You find some posts from blog posts from VMware and from other sources. If you follow those commands, your Salt master doesn't work anymore. You're knee deep, neck deep actually in Python dependency hell if you do that, which I was not able to recover from. I had to redeploy. So be aware of that. The documentation for this is really scattered. VMware has documentation for ARIA automation config, but a bunch of the things you would want to do, you find the information on the salt.io website. Those versions don't necessarily correlate, so it's kind of hard to figure out what works with which version and how. Because VMware documents how you deploy it, how you use it pretty easily, and then you find all the state files from someone else and it doesn't work, and then it's a bit of a mess. So that goes with the same thing, have a test environment for it. And as I mentioned, don't blindly follow guides, it will break things. I guarantee you. I've done it more than once. And the third thing, or last thing here, is if it's available in Salt, it might not be available in ARIA automation config yet. ARIA automation config version numbers follow the vRealize automation version numbers. Salt have their own thing. So which version is 8.14 translated to Salt 3006 or whatever? It gets messy quite quickly. So, quick demo, how you add a minion. From the web interface I'm going to show you now is a proprietary thing that VMware put into ARIA automation config. It's not part of Salt, but it's easier to show it in a web interface than just do command lines in a demo. So everything here is possible to do via command line in Salt, open source Salt, but the web interface I'm showing isn't available there. It's only available in ARIA automation config. So what you do is basically log in. This is the ARIA automation dashboard web page. These are the available minions that are looked for that Salt default DNS entry. They come in here, you accept the keys, and once they are in, you have accepted them, there they are. That's it. You just accept the keys that are there. And that key is used for the encryption. So there's an encryption key for each minion. So it's based on a private public key kind of infrastructure for that. So that's how easily someone can put up a Salt stack, or Salt minion master in your environment and start seeing if there are any minions out there. So, okay. One fun thing VMware has done with it is that in VMware Tools 12 or newer, you actually have the Salt minion included, which was kind of surprising. I didn't know that. If you set these two advanced config parameters for a given VM in vCenter, VMware Tools will pick that up and enable the Salt minion. By default, if you just do a VMware Tools install, next, continue, the minion is installed but not enabled. If you do this, you enable it from the vCenter. Otherwise, you can browse to the path on the VM and just run the enablement script from there as well. That's fine. But this is a way of doing it in a template, because this generates a minion ID based on the host name on the VM. So if you put this in a template and clone it, the minion ID will be the same as the VM name. So that's a way of doing this on scale. For Windows, it's default installed. For Linux, you need to install the OpenVM Tools /Salt package. It's not a part of the default VMware OpenVM Tools package, but it's there. So this is actually how that works. I just made a quick demo of how that actually works. Take that Windows machine there, edit it, do the advanced parameters, the ones I mentioned on the other one, desired state, set that to present. Once you add that, go and power on the VM. Of course, I've sped this up a bit, but it does pick it up. So once the VM is up and running, I can go back in here into the management interface and find. I needed to make it. I needed to wait a bit more. I should have edited that out. But once it's there, you'll see the new Windows machine available there, and then I can add it the same way I did with the other ones. So that's basically Minion installation config. There's a lot of things you can do there. You can tell the Minion to go to another host name than Salt if you want. That's fine, no worries. There's a config item for doing that. But the default is to look for that Salt item, just again. One of the fun things I did though, does anyone here run Pi-hole? I know what it is. Yeah. So DNS black hole for ads on the internet and whatever, right? I run that in my home lab in a 2-node clustered version. So I got so restrictive with my Pi-hole blocking that I had to make a secondary SSD for my wife because none of her clicks on Google worked anymore. I'm very happy with it though. She isn't. So, but what I figured out was Pi-hole is a way is an application that can be easily automated and easily installed. All you need is a config file, and then you run the installer. So what I did was basically to create a job in Salt or in our automation config, tell it to run towards the target is Ubuntu only, and then apply a state, and I've created that state. I'll show what it looks like afterwards. So once there's a job definition that has a state file in it, I can run that towards those two Ubuntu VMs, the run deploy Pi-hole, just to show that there is no Pi-hole there before. Run the command, wait a bit, let it do its thing. You can see that it's running, and once it's completed, you can look at the log output from that job. So it's here that which ones run, and this is the actual output from the command that I ran. So if I do the same there now, there is a full Pi-hole installation. Pre-configured, I can log into it as well. There it is. And that's done through a single state file. So the state file looks like this. This is really small, so it's hard to see. All the code is on my GitHub. You can copy this from there if you want to really study it. But the thing is, this section here, it's make Pi-hole directory, and then it creates the etc Pi-hole folder, right? The second part here is copy that file from the file server that is on the Salt master or the ARIA automation config master, the setupvars.conf file, which is what Pi-hole looks for. If that's present when you install it, it will install it based on the content of that file. The third part here is how I actually install it, which is basically running curl with the installation path for Pi-hole. So security-wise, probably not the best idea to run things directly off the internet, but okay, it works. And the last part I do here is set a grain. A grain was, remember, it was a piece of information you can get from a minion and put back, right? So I set a grain called present, and I set the value in that for Pi-hole. And I'll show you why afterwards. Well, I can then create a different target inside of Salt or ARIA named Pi-hole servers and check for, is service installed, does that have the value of Pi-hole? And once I do that, I can group them. So that's a dynamic group in Salt, only containing those minions that have that grain set. So it's a way of categorizing things and grouping them. So this is what it looks like. Those two VMs that I ran it towards, those are now members of that group. Another example is mounting NFS. You want to have an NFS export mounted on your Linux machines. Okay, it's an easy thing. I mean, it's not a big deal, but there's some fun things in there as well. So, same thing. I've created a job, targeted Ubuntu. Just select those, run the job, state apply again on the mount NFS state that I have, just to show you there's nothing there. And then I can run it. So once that job is done, and I'll go through the config of that as well afterwards, because there's a peculiarity there that I want to show you. So once that's done, return true, errors false. The raw output is this. Okay, so it looks good. Let's see. Yes, the NFS mount is there. I can go into it. I can read the files that are in there. Naturally, you have an auto-exec bat file there, of course. But yeah, that's a valid one, by the way. And it also added it to the FS tabs file so that it will actually auto-mount it the next time you run or reboot that VM. So what does that state file look like? Well, the fun thing here is the command called install NFS common. That's something I've called it. And then I run a salt command called package installed, pkg.installed, which then installs the NFS-common package. You don't define which package manager you're using. You use Salt's way of doing that. So that means if you run this towards on a Ubuntu minion, it uses apt. If you use Red Hat, it uses yum, right? So it actually translates that from the native command for the Linux distribution you have. So you can use the same command to do this on different OSs, different flavors of Linux. You can build in logic in these files as well. If OS equals Windows, then do this instead, right? But this kind of takes away the complexity of multi-Linux management. You don't have to care about that as a Salt admin because it does it with the native package manager that Linux distribution has. Second one it does, it creates a file, and there's the actual mount this IP address and what file type it is and whatever. That's the actual mount command. The other one just makes sure that the NFS common package is installed. If it is installed, it just returns already installed, continuing. And this is a pretty big one, though. In lab environments, if you want to have an automated way of installing Active Directory, you can do that in Salt as well. Well, not entirely in Salt, but mostly in Salt. Well, that's not true either. It's mostly PowerShell, but this is how it works. This is just basically a Windows 2019 server, I think it is. Nothing on it, empty VM. Same thing here. I'm creating a job, created a job called install Active Directory, targeted Windows servers. I can select one there, run the job, which is basically the state apply thing again. And it runs. I wish my home lab was this quick. It isn't. It's sped up. So it takes a while, but there it is, done. Okay, the raw output, I get everything that the command did back, so I can check the logs and see that everything's okay. If I RDP back to that VM now, it takes a lot longer to log in, which is a good sign. If I look at Windows here now, I have Active Directory users and computers. I have a new domain called area51.internal. Everything's up and running. So that's a fully functional Active Directory domain controller with DNS and everything. So how do you do that? Well, same kind of setup, but there is a different thing here called installed role, which is my name for it, and then it uses the command win_server_manager.install. So Salt knows about the Windows server manager way of installing features and roles. So the rest of it here is defining which roles do I want to have added. So AD domain services, RSAT AD tools, DNS, and RSAT DNS server. So that's all solved. So if I just stop it there, it will install all of those tools, but it won't configure anything. It just enables the features. So the next part is creating a domain. I've created a createdomain.ps1 file, a PowerShell command, that basically, and I say here, run that PS1 script through PowerShell on the minion. And restart true on that one and restart false on the first one. That's kind of important because if you restart here, it won't run that. So guess how I learned that. And then I just set a kind of value for an app ID in the grain thing to get it back into the management interface. So the create domain PS1 file is also available on my GitHub. You can look at that. You can find examples of that everywhere, how you do that. The only thing I'm doing here that's kind of fun is running it through Salt. I have another one here. I don't have a demo for it, but it's enable RDP. And I have to wrap up. So I'm going to do, I skipped that one. You can do Windows installation software as well, similarly to how you do it on Linux, if you enable a GitHub-based repository for MSI and install files in the backend. And then you can install Chrome and VS Code and whatever from there. So with 15 seconds left to go, I'm going to call it a day. So thanks for listening. Hope that was somewhat useful or interesting for you guys.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining my session, which is all about automating Horizon Cloud Next Gen. I will talk about how to start with automating Horizon Cloud Next Gen, what you need to do for that. So my name is Ivan de Mes. I work as a EUC architect for Orange Business in the Netherlands. I am also a vExpert, specifically in the area of end-user computing, cloud, but I'm also a vExpert Pro. I'm also part of the Dutch vEUC TechCon leadership team that organizes a yearly event that is fully focused on EUC products, VMware EUC products and services. I also have my personal blog, and you can find me on some social channels as well. So like I mentioned, I work for Orange Business, and we deliver a lot of standardized services to our customers. And of course, we want to do that in a quick and uniform way. So therefore, the heart is a little bit out of place, but still, we love automation. And we are using a lot of automation already for a lot of other services that we are providing to our customers. So we started looking at how can we provide remote desktops and applications to our customers, delivered as a service. And for us, Horizon Cloud Next Gen is a very good fit for that. And the reason for that is that Horizon Cloud Next Gen has been built from ground up with support for API. So with that API, we are capable of doing a lot of things that you would normally do in a console. You can now also do that with the API. In fact, everything that you do within the Horizon Universal Console translates into an API request. And as you can see, I've opened up my developer tools in the browser, and when I go to the Horizon Universal Console, you will see that it does a request to a so-called request URL. And with that, we also have a certain payload, and this payload, in this case, we are configuring, for instance, a domain. The payload specifies what we want to configure. So what would be a good first approach if you want to start looking at automating Horizon Cloud Next Gen? VMware, with the new version, so the Next Gen version, created a dedicated website, which is all about the Next Gen API. That specifies what kind of requests you can do, what kind of things you can configure, but also how to configure. So what kind of requests do I have to do, what is the request URL, etc., etc. But first things first, what we need to do first is to create an API token, and that gives us the ability to eventually talk to the Horizon Cloud Next Gen API. So that's something that I want to demonstrate in this video. So what we will do is we will log on to the Cloud Services control plane. And once we've done that, what we do is we go to the drop-down menu. And then we go to My Account. And when we are there, we open up the API Tokens tab. So there's an option to generate a new API token. So we click on that. We give our token a name. You can choose whatever you want. And with that, you can also specify for how long that token is valid. And you can specify months, days, years, whatever you want. After that, what you have to do is also specify the permissions. So you can specify what kind of permissions you want for that API token. And in this case, we select our Horizon Cloud service. And there are different roles or permissions. And we choose the administrator. And that gives us full permissions for the API within Horizon Cloud Services. You can also specify that you want a reminder so that when the token is about to expire, that you can also get an email. Then at least you know that the token is about to expire. Something very important, once the token has been generated, you have to copy the token and you have to store it somewhere safe because it is only provided once. So if you lose it, then you have to regenerate the token again. So the next thing that we have to do is, now that we have the API token, is we need to obtain an access token. So we're using the API token to get a, let's say, short life token that is needed for every request that you do towards the API. And there are different tools that you can use, whatever you prefer. It can be either curl, Postman, PowerShell. There are also other tools, of course. Personally, I'm a fan of PowerShell, so throughout the demos I will be using PowerShell in this case. So to obtain an access token, what we have to do, and I hope that it is a bit viewable, maybe it's a little bit small, but what we need to do is we need to construct a header, and the header has to be of a certain content type, which is specified in the documentation as well. So what we do is we construct that header with PowerShell, and that's the first step. Then what we do is we need to construct a body, and as you can see in the documentation, it needs a refresh token. The refresh token is actually the API token that we just generated. So with that, we construct our body. And don't worry, this API token is in plain text, but it has already been revoked, so it's not reusable. And once we have both the header and the body, we can now send the request to our request URL. And once we do that, we do the post command. We get our access token in return, which is this long string thing. And you can also see that it has an expiration of about 1800 seconds, which is about 30 minutes. So once this access token has expired, you need to regenerate that access token again. Now there are also certain requests that you do using the API for which you need the organization ID. And the organization ID is something that you can get manually by going to the Horizon Universal Console. Simply go to your account, the drop-down menu. You can see your company name or your organization name, and below that you will see your organization ID. And there's also a copy button there as well. But of course, we can also do it in an automated way. To be honest, I didn't find it in the API documentation from VMware, but somehow I did find out that it is possible. So what we can do is, again, we construct a new header, and in this case it's application JSON type. Then we specify a body in which we specify the API token. Don't get confused with the access token. So this action specifically needs a API token. And once we have done the request to the API, you will see that you can get the organization ID there as well. So for every request that you do for which you need an organization ID, you can get it using this API call. So as a simple example, I will show you how you can add an Active Directory configuration in an automated way. So you saw that we didn't have an Active Directory configuration just yet. And what we need is our request URL, and we also need a request body. Something that hasn't been mentioned in the documentation at this point is that you also need to have a header and that header contains the access token. So we had the API token. With the API token, we requested an access token, and now we're going to use that access token in the header as well. So in this case, we're starting from scratch again. So we have our API token, which we specify in the body. Then we will put the access token in a variable. And once that's done, we're going to construct a new header, which we need for adding the Active Directory configuration. So we have our access token available. Then we construct the header, and as you can see, we use that access token variable in the header. And then we can continue with constructing the body. Now, this is not a JSON type, but eventually with the post command, what we do is we convert the data to a JSON type. And we push that towards the API. And as you can see, we now have our first Active Directory configuration in place. And as you can see, it also reflects within the Horizon Universal Console that we have a new Active Directory configuration there as well. So I just mentioned a certain format that you need, a JSON format that you have to specify. And sometimes it can get a little time consuming on how to construct such a format. So therefore what we did was we generated we created a PowerShell module, and it makes it a little bit easier. Simply what you have to do is import the PowerShell module, which is the HCS functions model. Then we can check that the module is in place, and we can get all the commands from the PowerShell module as well. So there you will see that there are various commands that you can use for creating new things, removing things, updating things, etc. And like I said, it makes it a little bit easier for automating things. So again, I'm using the creating Active Directory configuration example. Again, we don't have an Active Directory configuration in place yet. And what we do is when you look at the command that we need for configuring Active Directories, we need our access token and organization ID again. So we will create that access token, and it's using the PowerShell commandlet for that. And we do the same thing for the organization ID. And once we have that in place, it's as simple as executing a PowerShell commandlet in which we specify the access token, the organization ID, and the required parameters for configuring our Active Directory configuration. Now, of course, we can also do this with getting information. So we can get our current Active Directory configurations, and this time I requested the access token on the fly within the command for getting the Active Directory configurations. So that's also very simple. And it's the same for removing an existing Active Directory configuration as well. So we remove the Active Directory configuration again with a commandlet. And we check that the configuration is indeed removed as well. So these were just simple examples, just to get you a little bit familiar on how to get started. But you can actually achieve a lot with the API. You can even perform a full end-to-end deployment within Horizon Cloud Next Gen. So that means that you can configure your full edge configuration. Also use app volumes for importing app stacks, entitlements, but also for the dynamic environment manager configuration. So that's a configuration for the file share. You can create your automated images and your automated pools as well. So it's a full end-to-end deployment that you can do. So to give you a little insight on how we do it, we have a single configuration file in which we specify everything that we need for our full end-to-end deployment. So again, it contains the edges with the edge gateway, the unified access gateways, Active Directory, but also images, pools, etc. And when we have that configuration file in place, it needs to be processed by something. So for that, we are using what we call processing scripts, which are PowerShell scripts that again make use of the PowerShell module that I just demonstrated. And once the file is being processed, everything is being pushed as a configuration to Horizon Cloud Next Gen. Now, as a, let's say, deployment vehicle, we are using Azure DevOps. That was something that we were already using for other services as well. And within Azure DevOps, you have what is called pipelines. And a pipeline is something that you can compare with, for instance, a task sequence or a runbook. So it contains a list of actions that need to be executed. So we're talking about stages in this case, and stages can contain jobs. So another example is again the Active Directory configuration, but it can also be the edge deployment and other things as well, of course. Then we have our configuration file in which everything has been specified, so also the Active Directory configuration, and we have our processing script. Then when we run our pipeline, so our runbook, so to say, in this case, as an example, I'm just selecting the edge deployment. And once we click run, after a couple of seconds, you will see that the edge will start running, and it gives all the jobs that are available within that stage. Takes a couple of seconds. Yep, and there we have all the jobs that will be executed as part of that edge state. So we start with Active Directory, and once that is finished, you will see that our Active Directory configuration is in place in the Horizon Universal Console. Same goes for the single sign-on configuration. And when we go to our capacity page, you will see that we have our site configured, we have our provider configured, and once our provider is configured, we can continue with the actual edge deployment. And of course, I'm doing this in fast forward. It takes a couple of minutes normally. So the edge is being deployed, and after some time it gets into a connected state, and the only thing that remains for this stage is the deployment of the unified access gateways. So again, the edge stage has completed. So all the jobs that are part of that are also completed. And you can see that everything is in either a connected or a ready state. And the same goes for app volumes and Dynamic Environment Manager. Again, just an example. We're going to run this stage as well. And we select the Dynamic Environment Manager and App Volumes stage, and it will start running 2 jobs within that stage. And this time what it does, it imports a set of App Volumes applications, and it will also entitle those applications to user groups in this case. And that configuration all comes from that single configuration file that I specified earlier on. Then we do the same for Dynamic Environment Manager. So what we have is we have our file share. So that file share hosts our Dynamic Environment Manager configuration, and it all gets configured automatically as well. But like I mentioned, and for time's sake, it's just a picture in this case, but you can go through all the stages to eventually get a full end-to-end deployment. It's just starting the pipeline, and everything comes from that configuration file. So with that, I hope that I gave you a little bit of an insight of what you can achieve with the Horizon Cloud Next Gen API. If you want more information, I would recommend going to the developer website from VMware. I also have a blog series in which I talk about how to get started with the API as well. It gives you some examples. With that, I want to thank you for joining this session, and I hope you have a nice rest of VMware Explore.